Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. Yeah. Okay, so we're in the middle here. I gave some sort of introduction last week, 2 weeks ago, but we didn't get into the text. So just to review for a moment, we discussed how every world has its internal element and its external element. Just like every person has his neshama, the soul and the body. There's the external and there's the internal. So the worlds also have like a neshama and a body. The body is the 10 sefirot, that's the structure. And then there's the soul, which is the divine energy that's in the 10 sefirot. Yeah, that's more or less what we discussed last week. And then we spoke about a mitzvah. Right, that a mitzvah, we said that what's the reward for a mitzvah? The mitzvah itself. Because what does the mitzvah do? The mitzvah takes a body, a physical object, or your body that's doing the mitzvah, and infuses it with divine energy. So what could be the reward of doing that mitzvah? Enjoying the divine energy. The problem is when you put on tefillin in the morning, how many times do you enjoy the divine energy of the tefillin, right? Usually not. We're in a body, we don't necessarily appreciate that. Oh, so when does that happen? That happens when the soul goes on high. When the soul, after 120, the soul goes into paradise. That's paradise. Paradise is the soul experiencing the divine energy that it invested, that it worked on during its lifetime. It's almost like a savings account, right? Every time you do a mitzvah, there's a little divine energy that goes into the savings account. And then after retirement, when the soul retires from the body, the soul gets to enjoy this retirement fund. And that's why we brought the Mishnah, Ethics of our Fathers, in which the beginning of the Mishnah says that 1 hour of good deeds in this world is better than the whole world to come. And then we said 1 hour of enjoyment, of pleasure, bliss in the world to come is more enjoyable than the whole life. How do those two things work? Because once a person dies, he can't do another mitzvah. He can't add any more capital into the savings account. So 1 hour in this world is more, you can be more productive and can accomplish more than hundreds of years of enjoyment in the world to come. But at the same time, even 1 moment of bliss of experiencing the savings account in the world to come doesn't compare to any enjoyment you can possibly attain in this world. Okay, so let's look at the words of the Alter Rebbe, bottom of page 559. All the aforesaid concerns the abode and station of the souls. The Rebbe notes station. Okay, let's skip this. Their Torah and divine service. However, in other words, not the abode. In other words, before we said the souls are either in Bria or Yetzira. That's about where the souls come from. But their Torah and divine service, however, are actually absorbed in the 10 Sefirot, which are a manifestation of godliness, and with which the Ein Sof light unites in perfect unity. In other words, the Ein Sof light radiating in each world is completely unified with the Sefirot of that world. Remember, the Sefirot is like the body. It's a structure. Specifically, this means that one's Torah and divine service ascend to the 10 Sefirot of Bria when generated by intellectual fear and love, and the 10 Sefirot of Yetzirah when prompted by natural fear and love, right? Because we said Bria is more the seat of intellect, whereas Yetzirah is more the seat of emotions, which is why angels, for the most part, are from Yetzirah. Now, within them, in other words, within the Sefirot of Bria and Yetzirah are clothed the 10 Sefirot of the world of emanation of Atzilut. And they, in other words, the 10 Sefirot of Atzilut are completely unified with them. The Sefirot of Atzilut are clothed in and completely unified with the Sefirot of Bria and Yetzirah. And the 10 Sefirot of Atzilut are in turn perfectly united with their emanator, the blessed Ein Sof. So it follows then that by ascending to the Sefirot of Bria or Yetzirah, the soul's Torah and divine service actually unite with the Ein Sof. Right? Because Yetzirah has the 10 Sefirot of Atzilut. The 10 Sefirot of Atzilut are one with God, with the Ein Sof. So if the soul connects with the 10 Sefirot of Yetzirah, he's connected with the Ein Sof. The souls on the other hand, in contrast with their Torah and divine service, are not absorbed into the godliness of the 10 Sefirot, but stand instead in the chambers and abodes of Bria or Yetzirah, which are the worlds of Bria and Yetzirah, separate beings that are not united with God, as are the Sefirot. There, in other words, in Yetzirah or Bria, the soul's delight in the radiance of the Shekhinah, meaning the blessed Ein Sof light, as it is unified with the 10 Sefirot of Bria or Yetzirah. And this radiance that they enjoy is actually a ray of the light of their own Torah and divine service. For the reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. So in other words, like this, when a person studies Torah or does a mitzvah, they draw down the Ein Sof light that's much greater than their soul, so to speak, right? Because their soul only reaches the world of Yetzirah, whereas doing a mitzvah is the will of God. The will of God draws down from the Ein Sof light. Sure, it goes through the world of Atzilut and the world of Bria and Yetzirah, but ultimately it's the Ein Sof light. So when a person does a mitzvah, and that's why the soul comes down into this world. If the soul isn't accomplishing something greater than itself, it wouldn't need to be here. What is the soul accomplishing? The soul is drawing down the Ein Sof light. Now, where does it draw it down to? Unfortunately, it doesn't come in a revealed way down here. It stays in Yetzirah. So when the soul goes on high and it goes to Yetzirah, it gets to enjoy there sort of this radiation, this light from the divine energy that it drew down through its mitzvah. But the soul itself stays in Yetzirah for the most part. Then you have the souls of tzaddikim, of a higher level of tzaddikim that go to Bria. Okay. But let's talk about Atzilus for a few minutes and the difference between Atzilus and Bria and Yetzirah. Yeah.
You want to just go back one thing when it said, but they're not in the 10 Sefirot, but they're in chambers or abodes. Is that like it's separated? The Sefirot are here and the chambers are here, but they're sharing this divine Ein Sof? Or is it like a mirror? I was, when we were going over that, it wasn't really, and you say they're not united with Hashem like the Sefirot are. So the light of the Ein Sof goes to the Sefirot, but the souls on the other hand are not part of that. They're like you said, it's two separate things. It says they're in chambers and abodes. I'm trying to visualize, on our chart of Sefirot and where the chambers are and how that sort of relates. I got thrown off there.
Yeah,
I apologize.
no problem. So I'll give you a warning. It's going to be a little hard to visualize because it's not a visual thing. Even the chart is not really a visual thing. It's very limiting in the fact that it is turned into a visual thing. Imagine you're, well, let's see if there's a contemporary. Yeah, okay. Imagine the president of the United States. Doesn't imagine any president you want. It doesn't matter. The metaphor I would use would be a king, because that's more poignant. It's more effective, but it's hard for us to imagine a king, so we'll just have to imagine the president. So imagine the president of the United States makes a contest that he wants to redecorate a room in the White House, and he's taking applications from people that that are architects or interior designers, whatever degrees, let's say interior designers, to lay out the room. And the last 100 finalists will be invited to physically tour the room and be able to create models that will be presented in the White House. And the winner will actually be able to go in and decorate the White House itself. But all of the finalists will get a signed letter, let's say, from the president, together with some sort of gift. Right. Now imagine you're one of the 100 finalists. You're not the finalists, but you're one of the 100 finalists. And you know that your drawing was inspected by the president himself, because he's the one that chose the final, so he must have looked at all 100 finalists. He's the one that you could see, he's the one that personally chose not your drawing, but wanted you to be there, gave you a gift with a signed letter, but you don't get to see him. You don't have time to meet all 100 finalists. The president is a human being. The president carries nothing. The president as a human being is no better than you as a human being. But for 4 years, he gets a title. So are you enthralled by the fact that the president acknowledged you, or by the fact that whoever the president is at the time acknowledged you?
President.
The president, the title, the president, right? Now, it happens to be that for those 4 years, this individual carries this title, right? But you came to the White House, the palace. Your drawing made it in to the president's chamber. He saw it. He considered it. But you don't have the... Now, when the drawing comes back, when the gift comes back, now you get something from the president that you didn't have before if you wouldn't have made that drawing. But you don't have the president. The same thing, well, not the same thing, nothing close to the same thing. But imagine that here. Imagine that, remember, the world of Yetzirah, let's take the world of Yetzirah, for example. The world of Yetzirah is a space. It could be right here. What's the space of Yetzirah? It's a state of consciousness based on the level of how much me there is versus how much God there is. That's the difference between these 4 worlds. The difference of the 4 worlds is the percentage of how much ego there is versus how much God there is. In Atzilut, it's 100% God. In Asiya, physical Asiya, it's basically 100% ego. And then in the middle, there's a spectrum. Okay. So if your soul is in a state of consciousness where there is a percentage, whether 5, 10, 15%, where it does not feel ego, it feels God, that's already not Asiya. This is Yetzirah. I'm just using numbers. Don't quote me on the numbers, but right, a percentage. When you're in that state, are you one with God? No, because you still have a 75% feeling of self, of ego. But the 10 Sefirot in that state are one with God. And because when I do a mitzvah and I'm in the world of Yetzirah, so my mitzvah rises to the level of Yetzirah, and because this is the will of God, my mitzvah connects to the 10 Sefirot of Yetzirah. But because the 10 Sefirot of Yetzirah are one with God, technically the mitzvah is elevated all the way to the Ein Sof himself. Now, I get to experience it in Yetzirah, but it's all within the framework of Yetzirah. I'm experiencing a world in which 75% is ego, or 51%, whatever, a majority is ego, and only a minority is God. So I'm in that world where I'm in the White House where the president does reside. Now, so in the White House, you have chambers, literally. Here, there's no chambers, literally. But it's so you're in the same world, you're in the same sphere, you're in the same ballpark. But just because you're watching the player play doesn't mean you get to talk to the player. It doesn't mean the player gets to notice you. Is that helpful?
Yeah, you mean, okay, so yes, okay, so like the palace, you're in the palace, but you're not necessarily in the room where the president.
In the king's
is.
chamber.
The king's chamber. Got it. That makes a lot of sense. That helps, because I didn't understand chambers and abodes.
Now,
And
we're going to get a little more into the nitty-gritty of, because at the end of the day, the chamber is still part of the palace.
right,
So the chamber is a world, is an entity, whereas Atzilus isn't really. It is, but it isn't. What does the word Atzilus mean? Did we mention last week what the word Atzilus means? Atzilus means,
it's the highest level, right?
yeah, the highest world that we know of. That's considered a world. Atzilus can mean a few things. Mean etzlo, which means near him, but Atzilus also means emanation. To emanate something. Like, for example, when God, the Jewish people wanted meat, and Moses turns to God and says, how am I supposed to get the meat? So God said, call together 70 elders, and I will emanate some of your spirit onto them. Okay? So in other words, it's the spirit of Moses, but it's outside of Moses himself, but it's still Moses himself. It's still Moses' spirit. It's not a translation of Moses' spirit. It's not a duplicate. It's the spirit of Moses somewhere else. So Atzilus is fascinating because on the one hand, it has 10 sefirot. God himself has no limiting factors. But at the same time, the 10 sefirot of Atzilut are not a new creation. They're an emanation. So in a sense, this is the first world, and that remember the question we started with, we started class with last week. You were in here last. You were here 2 weeks ago when we had class. You were. So you remember I started class by asking if there's what do we have that existed before it was created, right? We said the neshama, because the neshama, it says ata barasa, ata yitzarta, ata nafach, right? You created it, you formed it, and you breathed it in. But before it says neshama, it's tahora, it's pure even before it was created. So it existed before creation. So the neshama starts in Atzilus, and we know there are souls, there are tzaddikim that had souls of Atzilus. So in other words, it's a world that has some sort of structure, but at the same time, it's the Ein Sof light itself, which can't be configured, so to speak, into specific categories. Okay, how that works is a different question. The point is that Atzilus is a world, but it's a world that's one with God. It's in total unity with God. Now, in this point, there is a great separation between Atzilus and the other three worlds. We call them Biyah. Have you ever heard of Biyah?
Bia.
Biyah is Bet Yud Ayin. That stands for Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. So many times in Chassidus, you'll see the difference in Atzilus and Biyah. Because Biyah is the general term for the worlds that were created. Right? Because Bria is creation, formation, and action. So all those three worlds are post-creation. And Atzilus is before creation, but it's still a world.
Bia, doesn't that come from where, like, to be born or something, or Bria?
Bria is creation.
Bria is creation, but not Bia. Okay.
Bia, as in like coming with an aleph, like to come somewhere. So Bia is used in halachic terminology for physical intimacy. But that nothing to do with Bia is Bet Yud Ayin. It's an acronym for the three worlds of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. So from Bria and down is a creation. Creation by definition means something outside of the creator. Now, Hashem takes the 10 Sefirot of Atzilus, which is one with him, and infuses it in Bria. But now you have a body and a soul. Now you have a creation. Sure, there's a soul, there's divine light there. It's a godly world, but it's a creation. Whereas Atzilus doesn't have that element of creation. It's not something external outside of God. In many places, the Atzilus is referred to as a private domain, and as Bia is referred to as a public domain. What does it mean, public domain? It means that there's more than one boss, or more than one perceived boss. Now, although Atzilus seems to be very distant from Bia, it's a whole different category. Nevertheless, the 10 Sefirot of Atzilus is what sustains and gives life to Bia. Yeah. Because Atzilus is not a creation, in order for it to come into Bia, it has to go through a tzimtzum. Right? You know what tzimtzum is? Contraction. Right. So the first tzimtzum happened even before Atzilus. In order to even get names, to get anything, you need a tzimtzum. But then, in order for Atzilus, in order for the 10 Sefirot of Atzilus to go into Bia, it also needs to have a contraction, because remember, Atzilus is one with God, and if it's one with God and it would operate in Bia, Bia wouldn't be its own, it wouldn't be an independent, wouldn't feel independent. It would feel, right? The example I gave last night was if you worked in a factory and the CEO put his desk in the middle of the factory floor, no one would last. Why? Because you'd have to work 24/7 at your best, because the CEO is sitting there. You do your best work. You're gonna kill yourself. So if God were to be present in the world, we wouldn't be able to operate as human beings. We'd be angels. We'd be operating in a perfect way. Okay, either we expire or not. Either way, we wouldn't be operating as people distinct or that feel distinct from God. In order to do that, God had to make a tzimtzum to, this is like a metaphor. Why did a metaphor work before? Why did a metaphor, you asked the question, I give a metaphor and suddenly you understood it. Why?
It just brings it to a visualization for me, that how I could understand it.
In other words,
Perception.
the metaphor helps distract you from the complicated nature of the thing you want to understand. Because the thing you want to understand is abstract. The metaphor didn't help you understand the abstract nature of Bria. The metaphor helped you say, okay, if I'm going to look at it in a physical way, then a palace or this makes sense. Okay, but once you say, you know what, but I want to understand the thing itself. So the metaphor might help get you closer, right? It says Shlomo HaMelech was able to give 3,000 metaphors. It doesn't mean he thought of 3,000 examples, right? He was able to get you 3,000 steps closer to the abstract idea that you're trying to understand. So the same thing is, so what's a contraction? It's like a metaphor. It's the metaphor conceals the idea so that you're able to grasp it, even though you still can't grasp the idea itself. It's ungraspable. Right. Okay, let's look inside here on page 562. The world of Atzilus is beyond the intelligence, grasp, and understanding of a created being's intellect. And what is created being? Not just humans, even a spiritual being in the world of Bria is, after all, a created being. And Atzilus is beyond its grasp as well. For the Chachma, Bina, and Das of the Ein Sof are united with him there in Atzilus in perfect unity. And because the 10 Sefirot of Atzilus are united with God in perfect unity, a created being can't understand that. A creation cannot understand its creator. In a profound and wonderful, okay, so the continuation. So the 10 Sefirot and Atzilus are united with him in perfect unity, in a profound and wonderful unity, infinitely superior to that unity found in Bria. Why? For there in Atzilus, they descended to illuminate only to a restricted, contracted degree. In other words, the Chabad of Atzilut, referred to here as Chabad of the Ein Sof, radiate in Bria only after their light is contracted, so as to enable the intellect of created beings, namely the angels and souls of Bria, to receive Chabad, which is wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, from these Sefirot of Atzilut, so that they might know God and so that they might grasp and comprehend something of the Ein Sof light. But in order to understand even something, there had to be a contraction. To the extent that the intellect, how much can you understand? Can a creation of Bria understand the Ein Sof? To the extent that the intellect of a finite, limited, created being is capable of understanding. In a way, to achieve this purpose, a contraction of Chabad of Atzilus was necessary. Why? Lest they, the created beings of Bria, if this light would have come to Bria without contraction, they would dissolve out of existence, unless they furthermore cease altogether to exist as created beings, reverting instead to their source and root, namely godliness itself. Yeah?
Mhm.
Let's continue here on page 564. 2 more paragraphs. This contraction, which Chabad of Atzilut undergo in order to radiate in Bria, thus causes the souls in the world of Bria to be illuminated by a glow of Chabad of the Ein Sof. In other words, Chabad of Atzilut. It is this contraction that enables them to have some perception of the Ein Sof light. And then, so this is all in Bria. So in Bria, the creations of Bria can have some insight into Ein Sof light because of the contraction that the 10 Sefirot of Atzilut undergo before they come into Bria. However, the created intellectual beings of Bria cannot, however, apprehend Chabad as they are in all their undimmed intensity in the world of Atzilut, where the Chabad are not contracted to such a great degree as in Bria. And therefore, their thought cannot grasp there at all. In other words, the thought and intellect of the created beings of Bria can in no way grasp the light radiating in Atzilut. There's a story, a metaphor, told of a king who loved to order suits from a specific Jewish tailor. And he made fabulous tailor, made the best suits. You can imagine once the king starts liking the Jewish tailor, so you have the anti-Semites in the government that don't want this Jew around. So they try thinking of ways to plot against the Jewish tailor. Finally, one of the ministers told the king, you should know the tailor steals from you. Like, what do you mean? It's like, you give him a big piece of material to make a suit from, right? He never gives you back the scraps. What does he do with the scraps? He's probably keeping them for himself. So the king figured he'll test it. So he sent him a big piece of material, and to sew him a new suit. The tailor sews him a new suit. He returns the suit with no scrap pieces of material. So right away, the king throws him in prison and sentences him to death. He stole from the king. Before he was executed, he was given one last request. So he requested that they bring the suit with a scissor. So they bring the suit that he sewed with a scissor, and he starts taking out the stitching, and he undoes the whole suit, and he shows the king that he made the whole suit out of the one piece of material. He didn't want to cut anything, so he just folded in and sewed in the entire piece of material into the suit. But then he finished off and he said, now you know that I didn't steal anything, but you don't have a suit anymore. Right? In other words, if we were to try to undo creation and try to find God in creation, we wouldn't have a creation anymore. God wants us to reveal him in creation, so we can't take creation apart. We have to remain a created world and somehow try to reveal God by doing mitzvahs and studying Torah in the world. But if there wouldn't be a tzimtzum, if God's light himself would have emanated, would have come into the world without tzimtzum, that wouldn't be possible. There wouldn't be a world to have. Okay. So
I thought you were going to say the guy went into the business and called it Lord and Taylor.
Do they still exist?
They just a few years ago, I think they went out.
Why not? See what happens when you go into business with God?
That's right.
So now let's get back to souls,
Too much Taylor, not enough Lord.
Exactly. They forgot that Lord came first in the name. Okay, so we started off by saying that angels are in Yetzirah, souls are in Bria. Then we said some souls are in Yetzirah and some angels might be in Bria. Now, this is all generally speaking. However, when you dig down, we said, really the neshamas of Bria and Yetzirah are both tzaddikim. The question is their primary mode intellect? That's Bria. Is the primary mode emotions? And that's Yetzirah. Most of us are from Asiya. Our souls come from the spiritual Asiya, but the last one. And now what Rebbe is going to tell us, really there are souls that come from Atzilus. How can a soul come from Atzilus? Atzilus gives no room to the physical world to be an independent world. So what does it mean? How does an neshama come from Atzilus? So what unites souls that come from Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, the same thing that unites those three worlds. The fact that they're all creations. In other words, the fact that they all possess ego. To what degree? That depends. Bria is majority godly, minority ego. Yetzirah is 50-50. Asiya is majority ego, minority divine, godly. Okay. But then you have some who are souls from Atzilus. What does that mean? It means that there's zero ego. What that means practically is that those souls roam this earth with no real connection to this world. What does that mean, no real connection? This world doesn't influence them in the slightest. So the first example, you have Abraham. Abraham worships God. Abraham spreads the word of God. They threaten to kill him. They threaten to torture him. It doesn't even, he almost doesn't hear it. Now, there have been many tzaddikim over the history that have given their lives and risked their lives for God and given their lives for God. Abraham didn't. Abraham was saved. But there were many that did. But they risked their lives for God. There was a they there. By our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're referred to as the chariot. We discussed it. There is no they. There is no they means this is egoless. So this is like a neshama of Atzilus that comes from Atzilus. In other words, there's total unity with God. The fact that they're in a body doesn't affect the soul in the slightest. The soul remains, and therefore, if the body's threatened, it doesn't care. It doesn't even see the body. It sees whatever God wants it to see. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Moshe was the same way. Moshe, it says, by the way, the souls of Atzilus, in general, it says that the creations in heaven are referred to as creatures of the sea, whereas we, in the world, are referred to as creatures of land. Why? Have you ever heard this? Creatures on land feel separate from their source. Now, trees and plants feel very connected to their source, but they also don't have a lot of feelings. Okay, but at least we recognize that they're connected to their source. Everyone knows if you cut a tree, sever it from the ground, it's going to die. Right? Everyone knows if you suffocate a human being or an animal or any living creature, it's going to die, right? But when the tree is standing, do you automatically see the source? Do you right away think about the soil? No, you look at the tree. You look at the tree as a majestic tree in and of itself. You don't think about the source. When you start seeing dead branches, then you say, hey, wait, why is it dying? And then you look down at the trunk. But otherwise, you don't look at the trunk. The trunk is usually not the nicest part of the tree. You look at the tree itself. Yeah. When you see an animal, you don't see air. What do you see? You see a majestic animal or a cunning animal, whatever you want to see, a colorful animal. When you look at a fish, sure, you want to see the fish, but when you look at the fish, you see water. What happens the minute you take a fish out of the water? You think, are you killing it or are you throwing it back in? How long do you keep it off for, right? Creatures, and why is that? We also live in our source of life, air. It surrounds us, but we don't see it. Because the fish live in their source of life, it's visible that they live in their source of life, so they project their life source much more than creatures of land. So it says in general that spiritual creatures like angels are considered creatures of the sea, right? Because they know they're conscious, and anyone that sees an angel is conscious that this is a divine creation. We're divine creations too. We don't see it, so we're considered tzaddikim, it says, are creatures of the sea walking on the earth. In other words, the creatures of the sea, their souls are one with God. They themselves see 24/7 their source, their life source, but they're walking on ground. In other words, they're in a body that doesn't see it, or that we don't see it looking at the body. Yeah. This is going to be a catch-22 question. What was Moshe called? Moshe, right? What was his given name by his parents, by his Jewish parents? Do you know? Do you know where the name Moshe comes from?
Because Batya.
Who gave him the name?
Batya.
Batya gave him the name. So his surrogate mother, whatever, his adopted mother, gave him the name Moshe, which was an Egyptian word. His given name, it says he had 7 names, but his given name, according to Medrash, was Tuvia. Because they saw that the house filled with light. So Tov, right? God's name, God is good. Huh? Why was he called Moshe? Because he was drawn out of the water. What did we say? The neshama of Atzilus is a creature of the water that lives on land. So Moshe is called Moshe because he was drawn from the water. He's walking on the face of the earth, but he's drawn from the water. But in general, it says that our 7 shepherds, the 7 ushpizim, they are all neshamas of Atzilus. There are others throughout history that are also, you could tell, were souls that really the world didn't affect them one iota. They were 100% expressions of godliness. They did not, they lived in the world as if the world didn't exist. Not ignoring it. It didn't affect them. So when something had to be said, they said it regardless of what the risk was, regardless of what was going on. And what's the foundation of this soul? That it has no ego, it has no self. It doesn't love God because there is no it. Okay, let's look here. So now that we know that Atzilus, the second to last paragraph on 564, now that we know that Atzilus is one with God, something that doesn't exist in Bria and Yetzirah, which are creations, for this reason, Atzilus is the abode of the great tzaddikim, whose service of God is far superior, even to fear and love derived from understanding and knowing his greatness, which is Bria. Just as Atzilus transcends by far the level of understanding and knowledge of a created being's intellect. Yeah, just like Atzilus is no relationship, is night and day to a human being. So Atzilus is night and day to Bria. Because remember, everything past Bria as a creation is a whole new category. Atzilus is God, is one with God. So what do we see in these souls? Their service is rather on the level of an actual chariot of the blessed Ein Sof. nullifying their very existence before him and incorporating themselves and all that they possess within his light. Through the observance of the Torah and the mitzvahs. Our sages applied such a description to the patriarchs, saying that they themselves constituted the divine chariot, for this was the patriarchs' level of service throughout their lives. Yeah?
So when you're talking about the divine chariot of the patriarchs is different than the vision that Ezekiel and Isaiah have of the chariot, a divine chariot.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it doesn't say they were those images. It says the way the Zohar refers to them is a chariot to the divine. Not from a vision. Just it's like a metaphor, a descriptor. They are like a chariot, just like a chariot has no will of its own. It has no thinking, no intellect or emotions of its own. It's just a wagon. It's just right. It's inanimate. So too the neshamas of Atzilus, when they manifest in this world, their bodies have no existence of their own. They are just chariots to the divine. There's a story told of the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab. He lived in the time of the revolution in Russia, the beginning of the end of the Tsar's regime, which was very difficult for the Jewish people, and the beginning of communism, which also wasn't very easy for the Jewish people. But it was in that time, towards the end of the Tsar's regime, that they wanted to start figuring out other ways of getting rid of Judaism, of traditional Judaism. One of the things they came up with, the government themselves didn't come up with it. It was the more liberal, more the enlightened Jews that came up with these ideas of how to get, how to separate the Jews from their adherence to the rabbis. Would be that in order to be a recognized rabbi in a city by the government, you'd have to be able to read and speak, read and write Russian, which the average rabbi couldn't necessarily do because they didn't have a secular education, which would mean the only rabbis be rabbis with a secular education, which by definition means you're not 100% in the world of Torah, which by definition means you're more likely to give in on certain things, which would then derail Judaism in Russia. So the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, was one of the rabbis called to Petersburg for meetings, government meetings, amongst other rabbis. And all the other rabbis were at the end persuaded to sign on to this new decree. The Rebbe Rashab stood up and vehemently opposed it. And it was he was endangering his life to oppose the government. And it was a king. It was a czarist regime. So one of the great rabbinic authorities at the time, Reb Chaim Brisker, was there, and he turned to the Rebbe and he said, Lubavitcher Rebbe, how can you risk your life for this? You can only risk your life for cardinal rules or for anything that's trying to uproot Judaism. How can you risk your life for this? So he said that this is how I feel. So he said, since when does feelings dictate halacha? So the Rebbe Rashab told him that when I was 12 years old, I trained my body, to follow Shulchan Aruch. In other words, at the age of 12, the Rebbe Rashab was able to strip away his own will of what his body would do, that it would follow instinctively whatever the Code of Jewish Law says. So when the Rebbe Rashab said that his instinct was, this is a danger to Judaism to the extent that it demands self-sacrifice, he's following it. And this rabbi who Chabad wasn't a Chassid. Brisk is not no connection to Chassidus. He followed the Rebbe Rashab, and as did others. But this is sort of like an example of what it would look like in this world to have the neshama of Atzilus, a neshama that's one with God to the extent that it has no desire of its own. And therefore, if the neshama does something, this must be what God wanted. It's not like a regular tzaddik that has free choice that can go and do something else. This is the question. Did Moses have free choice to hit the rock, to hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock? If he was in a Neshama of Atzilus, not necessarily. Okay, go figure. That's already a conversation for tzaddikim. Okay, so now, before we conclude for today, let's address something that should be bothering you, but might not be. And that is, we're spending so much time talking about Atzilus, and we're making it very clear that Atzilus is only relevant to great tzaddikim. So does that mean we have no connection to this? And if so, why are we studying it? Why are we talking about it?
Because
We're not in the business of studying Kabbalah. We're in the business of studying Chassidus, which is Kabbalah that's applicable, that's relevant to my divine service. Yeah.
Because we're abandoned. We're struggling. We're trying to get there.
But one of the key features of Tanya is that we should have realistic expectations. And one of the realistic expectations that's a big shocker to many Jews is that you can never be a tzaddik, which means don't try to be a tzaddik. We should try to be a tzaddik in action, but don't ever be depressed that you're not a tzaddik. Because since when do you think you're capable of being a tzaddik, right? The minute someone's depressed that they're not the president of the United States, then you got a problem. If they have a dream to be the president, that's admirable. If they're going to work their lives to be a tzaddik, that's admirable. The minute you become depressed that you're not, that's a problem. That's an emotional problem, because that means you expected to be worthy of it. Since when? Who decided? So the answer is we're capable of experiencing this. We may not experience it long term or permanently, but we are capable of experiencing somewhat of it. And this would be during the time of prayer. We know that prayer is referred to as a ladder. Tefillah is referred to as the sulam, the ladder of prayer. And on this ladder of prayer, there are 4 general rungs. The first rung of prayer is called Birkot HaShachar, or Tfilat HaShachar, the morning prayer. This is where, in Chabad, we start with Hodu. This is where we sort of modeh ani, we just acknowledge God. There's no intellect, there's no emotions, there's nothing. Just a statement, a declaration. I know that God is above me. I'm not at the top of the ladder. I'm under the ladder. God is the highest. That's the first level. But then you go up a level. And we say Baruch Sha'amar, and we say all the Hallelujahs, and we say what we call Sukkei de Zimra, verses of praise. Tel Yishtabach, right? Yishtabach Shimcha. That's the end of the section of prayer, the second section of prayer, the verses of praise. And here already we get to the world of Yitzira, formation, right? There's song, there's music, there's already some sort of emotion here. I'm expressing a fact. I'm amazed by the greatness of God, right? We describe the creation, and it's a very emotional part of prayer. So that the second step, so the first step is Asiya. The second step is Yitzira. The third step is the blessings of Shema and Shema itself. The blessings of Shema is all about the angels, helping us understand what it's like to reach a level of love of God. Then we get to Shema, where we meditate and think about the unity of God. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and that right away leads to V'ahavta, to love. But it's more of it's a love that comes from intellect. This is Bria. This is rising to the level of Bria. Now you'd expect someone who's going up these steps on the ladder, you'd expect every level you go up, the more excited you get, the more energetic you get, the more, even in an external way, because you're getting closer to God, right? In your mind, you're becoming closer to God. You have more of an understanding and feeling. And then what happens when we start the Amidah? Suddenly it all comes to a standstill. We stand in one place, we don't move, we don't even speak out loud, and we're just talking to God himself. This is an experience of Atzilus. In Asiya, Yetzira, and Bria, I was involved. I was meditating. I was describing in an emotional way God's greatness. I was involved in this picture. I was trying to reach a level of love. There was me involved. When it comes to Amida, and we're standing in front of God, then there's no more me. Now it's just about talking to God. It's about God, not about me. So is that Atzilus? Sometimes our mind can be trying to go in 50 different places. But is it possible to experience Atzilus in that way? Yeah. That would be a semi-experience of Atzilus during prayer. Okay, let's just finish these last few words inside. And then, so on the bottom of 565, but he whose soul's root is of too limited a capacity for this perfect service on the level of a chariot, so that through his service of Torah and mitzvot, he be constantly nullified before and absorbed in God's light for the average Joe like us. And he can therefore attain this state only intermittently and only at times of divine favor on high, such as during the Shmona Esrei prayer. You know what Shmona Esrei prayer is? Mm-hmm. The Amida, which is at the level of Atzilut. And especially when bowing in the 4 designated places in this prayer, for every such act of bowing represents the level of Atzilut, as is written in Pri Eitz Chaim in the section dealing with the welcoming of Shabbat. Why? For it embodies the idea of self-nullification in God's life, right? That I am no longer me, bowing down, making less of myself, to be accounted as absolutely naught before him. In the case of he who can attain the level of a chariot only at such propitious times, then even at these times, the principal abode of his soul is in the world of Bria. For we are dealing here with a soul associated with the world of Bria. So I myself am still in the world I'm connected to, and only occasionally, at a time of divine favor, will his soul rise to Atzilut as feminine waters, as is known to the students of the Kabbalah. Okay, we won't get into that. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that we can experience this, but it takes a lot of effort, and it doesn't change where we are, it just changes our experience. There's a nice story of the Maggid of Mezrich. You know, the Maggid of Mezrich was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov. He was the Rebbe of the Alter Rebbe. So once a colleague of his, a friend of his from Yeshiva, from days before he became a Chassid, came to visit, and he was also studied a lot of Kabbalah before he came to the Baal Shem Tov. So his friend was also a big Kabbalist. And when he wanted to speak to the Maggid, he was told you have to wait till the Maggid finishes davening. And it took a few hours for him to finish davening. So when he came to the Maggid, he said, "What happened? We both study the same Kabbalah. We both have the same meditations during davening. Why I was finished in the morning and it took you a whole day, whatever, or so many hours?" So the Maggid answered him with a metaphor. He said, "What do you do for a living?" So he said he has a store. Twice a year, he goes to Leipzig to buy merchandise. He brings it home, and his wife runs the store. And then at the end of 6 months, she gives him an inventory of what they need, and he goes back to Leipzig. He buys more, and like this, they make a living. So the Maggid asked him, he said, "Aren't you wasting so much time from Torah study by actually traveling to Leipzig? Why don't you just, in your mind, envision going to Leipzig, buying all the merchandise and coming back, and in 5 minutes you can have the whole image in your head, and you don't have to actually go there and waste weeks of traveling from Torah study." So his friend looked at him and was like, "You totally gone mad? If I don't go to Leipzig, then I'm not going to have anything to sell. I could dream from today till tomorrow. I'm not going to have anything to sell." So the Maggid told him, he's like, "That's the difference between me and you. We were younger and we studied Kabbalah together, and we learned how to pray according to the Kavanah of the Arizal. For us, it was an experience. You know, we were in our minds traveling somewhere. That doesn't take so long. But if you actually want to travel there, that takes much longer. It takes a lot more effort." So we may never be able to actually travel to Atzilus, but we can at least experience it to a certain degree while meditating in prayer, while recognizing that we're standing in front of God during the Amidah. That's an opportunity to realize that there is a level, there is a place where we're truly nothing. The only real existence is God. Right?